Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first webinar in the Guild of Music Supervisors 2021 conference. We are here to talk about unions in music supervision. I'm very, very happy that we have this amazing panel of panelists from both SAG-AFTRA and AFM. Let me go ahead and introduce them. We have Janee Lynch from SAG-AFTRA, Casey Bocobo from SAG-AFTRA. From AFM, we have Peter Marroquin and Alyson Sheehan. So let's start off with Janee. Can you go ahead and tell us a little bit about SAG-AFTRA and what your role is there?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I'm going to kick it to Casey. I have a crying dog in the background. So
okay, no worries. Let's come back to Janee. So Casey, take it away.
Sure. My name is Casey, and I'm one of the business representatives for SAG-AFTRA, and I handle any reuse of any sound recording in any type of medium. And SAG-AFTRA union, we usually handle the contract education regarding enforcement for any singers that pertaining to our sound recording, such as television, film, new media, commercials, and under our jurisdiction.
Great, thank you. Janee, you're up.
I'm back. Sorry about that.
No worries, no worries.
So I handle all songs recorded initially for TV, film, and new media, and any reuses in new mediums of those songs.
Perfect, thank you. Let's talk to our friends from AFM. Peter, why don't you tell us a little bit about AFM and what your role is there? Oh, I think you're on mute.
There you are. Never fails on Zoom. AFM is here to negotiate collective bargaining agreements on behalf of the musicians, so that we can collect and reward the performance that they have recorded when it's used in new mediums. My department specifically handles the use of sound recordings in TV films and theatrical films. But we also have departments that handle commercials, which you'll hear more about in a bit. But that's mainly what I do. So I get to work with a lot of music supervisors who are looking for quotes, on what it will cost for them to use the work from our performers in sound recordings. So it's good to be here.
Great, thank you. Alyson, you're up. Tell us about what you do at AFM.
Hi, yeah, so as Peter mentioned, we represent the recording musicians, primarily instrumentalists and also music preparation people. So that includes orchestrators, arrangers, and the people who function to, really create the music that you're hearing. In regard to my job specifically, I am the contract administrator for the commercial announcements agreement, and that includes advertisements, commercial campaigns, all of that kind of stuff. And we make sure that the musicians who functioned on the original recordings get compensated properly for when that work is utilized into commercials. So that can be film scores or sound recordings or really any previously recorded music. So that's primarily my position.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Just a little bit of housekeeping for everyone who's tuning in. What we're going to do is that we're going to take your questions throughout the webinar as opposed to taking them at the end. So if you have a burning question that is on topic with us as we're speaking, feel free to pop it into the Q&A and we'll go ahead and address it at that moment. And let me just back up and give a bird's eye view of what we're doing today. Because as music supervisors, when you use a piece of music in your audio visual media, you have to clear two types of copyrights. You have to clear the Circle C, which is for the music and lyrics, and you have to clear the Circle P, which is the master recording rights. And what happens in that Circle P is sometimes you might have union players or singers embedded into that master recording. And sometimes there may be what we call a new use reuse fee there too. And so that's why we're gonna talk about today. And that's why we have these experts to tell us about is there a fee or isn't there? And how can they help us figure out what our obligation to pay is? So with that, let's go back to Janee. So tell me, Janee, what is a union job versus a non-union job?
So a union job is any work that's covered under our collective bargaining agreement. So what that means is we have pre-negotiated with labels and with the studios certain working conditions and wages that are applicable to any recordings done specifically for a sound recording or specifically for TV, film, or new media and commercials. A non-union job is kind of a free-for-all. So that's something that a performer has to individually negotiate all of their terms. So they would have to negotiate upfront any reuse provisions for use of their music and new mediums. Under a union job, that's already pre-negotiated in our agreements. So it doesn't have to be negotiated per se at time of reuse. There is a caveat though for reuse of TV, film, and new media productions in relation to reuse, which is you do have to gain permission from the performer and bargain at no less than the current applicable rates in order to reuse that material in a new medium.
Right. There's several things that have to come into play too, right? Because in order for it to be a union gig, number one, your members have to be a member of your union, number one. And number two, whoever is hiring has to be under the jurisdiction or part of the collective bargaining agreement. Is that correct?
So yes and no. So while you do have to obtain membership at some point, once you've worked a union job, you do become eligible and then become a must join at your next working job, is our contracts cover all performers working under our jurisdiction. So if you're a non-union and you get hired for a gig, that's going to get you what we call a Taft-Hartley. So that's going to give you eligibility to be able to join and become a member. So you don't necessarily have to be a member to receive coverage, just working under our jurisdiction under a covered production.
Right. Peter or Alyson, can you jump in on the AFFM side about, non-union versus a union gig?
Sure, I'll jump in. It works very similarly. Absolutely, it stems from the signatory employer. So it's all about whether or not the employer has signed on to one of our collective bargaining agreements. We have a few term signatories, which are the people that we actually meet across the table with and negotiate the agreements with. And then we also have what we call Me Too signatories, which are entities that sign on for a single project, maybe an album where they want to specifically abide by the terms and conditions of our collective bargaining agreements. So basically that is where the union or non-union stems from. And also similarly to SAG-AFTRA, the membership of the musician is not a determining factor. We have union gigs and, as we'll be discussing later, union covered recordings that have non-members on them. Mm-hmm. And that's because it's a signatory employer.
Got it. And I was, in preparation for this webinar, I went to both of the SAG-AFTRA and AFFM website, and there is a lot of information there. And and so much I couldn't possibly gobble it all up. I hopefully you guys will be able to share some of that information. But the thing that I did see on the AFFM was that a lot of the major record labels are signatories and are part of your collective bargaining agreement. Is that correct, Peter and Alyson? Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So when you're talking about Warner Music Group, Universal Music Group, Sony Music Entertainment, what you consider Hollywood Records as part of Disney, the larger record labels, all of them are term signatories to our sound recording labor agreement, which means that they are the actual entities that we meet across the table with to bargain this agreement. And then it applies to all of their covered labels, which are the labels that they have agreed to abide by the terms and conditions of our agreements. And yes, it's the vast majority of the labels owned by these larger record companies.
So is it safe to say that because they are signatory to those collective bargaining agreements, all of their recordings are union gigs? Is that correct?
The vast majority, and kind of what I just alluded to about the covered labels, that is, they have some labels that are not signed on to the agreement, but yes, as term signatories, pretty much what they produce is pursuant to our sound recording labor agreement, which is why if you are licensing anything or facilitating a license with one of those major record labels, absolutely reach out to the AFM and see if there are AFM fees on the track.
Yeah, thank you so much, because that's kind of where I was going with that, because I think our music supervisors are so used to clearing with publishers and record labels that they're forgetting about this component of the unions. So now that you named off all those record labels, which all the music supervisors license from, they should be warned that these are all signatories to the collective bargaining agreement, and they should definitely do as you say and reach out to you guys to see if what those union fees might be. Casey, is that the same case with SAG-AFTRA?
Yes, it's the same thing with the SAG-AFTRA. So if they're not the music supervisor, if they're not really sure, reach out to us and we'll make sure that we give them the correct information. Either there's non-signatory or signatory, because there's other sub-label that was signed originally, but it was not covered under the the three major label. They don't own the master. Yeah.
Oh, got it. So let's talk about. Let's say a major recording artist on one of those labels decides that they want to cut a song, and so they need to hire AFM musicians along with SAG-AFTRA singers. So can you maybe walk me through that process of how they need to be in compliance with these collective bargaining agreements? Because I'm sure, because these are unions, they state what the working conditions are going to be. They're going to state how they're going to get, what they're going to get paid. Janee, can you jump in on the SAG-AFTRA side?
Yeah, absolutely. So with singers, there was actually a question in here, and I want to answer that real quick too. And it was a question about thinking SAG only covers actors. So in 2012, SAG became SAG-AFTRA. It was two unions that merged into one. And just so everyone is aware, SAG stands for Screen Actors Guild, and AFTRA is American Federation of Television Radio Artists. But under both unions, their singers had coverage. So I just kind of want to debunk that myth that SAG-AFTRA is only for actors. We actually cover a multitude of performers under our agreement. So just to answer that person's question. But as far as the collective bargaining units go, so once a performer is engaged under a covered production, it would be the producer's responsibility under TV, film, and new media to reach out to the performer, confirm rates, or negotiate better terms and conditions than what's already bargained in our agreements. And if it's a solo duo session, the performer is going to be responsible for filling out all of their paperwork. So they're going to be given the contract from the producer, and they're going to have to fill out what's called a singer member contract report. And what that report does is it tells us what happens in the session. So the performer will sit and say, I worked these hours, these were the songs recorded in the session, and these are the rates in which are applicable, and I did X amount of sides, which is multi-tracking or overdubs, and I did sweetening. So they'll get that information. Now, if it's a group singer session, so groups 3 or more, one of those singers has to be a vocal contractor. So they're going to be responsible for doing all that information for the performers. So they're going to get the contracts from the producer, they're going to forward that to the performers, and they're responsible for filling out that report and sending it into the union. So that's how we're able to keep the flow of information and material very succinct and easy. And so that report, though, is so important. So under sound recordings, that report is called a session report. And the reports are so important because that is how we are able to identify all vocalists on those tracks for new use, reuse purposes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Peter, you had typed something in the chat. Can you go ahead and repeat that for everyone who's not reading that? Because I think it's really pertinent to what we're talking about right now.
Sure, definitely. So, it can be time consuming to go over the steps to prepare a quote for the fees that would apply for a new use in film. So the more information that we receive at the beginning, the quicker it's going to go. And basically the information that you want to submit to us, if you plan to use a recording in a film, is the song title, the artist name, the name of the album, the year that the recording was released, give us the name of the film. Very important, we need to know the licensor because we will check whether that licensor is signatory to our agreement. That determines what fees will apply. Send us the licensing fee. And also let us know if your film was produced outside the US and or Canada, because foreign fees may apply. And you can let us know that by also providing us the information on whether the license was worldwide or to a specific territory. All of those items will help us determine what the fees will be.
Perfect.
And the same thing goes with, sorry. It's the same thing goes
Casey,
with the SAG. Sorry, I apologize. Yeah, the same thing goes with SAG-AFTRA. Yeah, we need all that information because we have a threshold regarding the licensing fee, like 75 and below and 75 above.
75 below and 70. What do you mean 75?
I mean, sorry, it's like the 7,500 licensing fee below, and then 75,000 above. So.
Oh, no worries. Thank you for explaining that.
For the below, it's like the percentage, and then the 75 and above is the full rate.
Right. And then just to piggyback on what Casey said, that's only applicable to sound recording.
Sound recording only.
The licensing fee has no effect on rates for original music produced under our TV, film, or new media contracts.
Got it. So what I was trying to get at with talking to you guys about when the original work is created, because there are a whole bunch of variables for that as far as what the singers and musicians get paid for that original work. And now I want to parlay that into when that original work now gets what I call an out of context use. It is now being used in another medium. Let's say it was to be released on CDs, but now someone wants to use it for a television program. Talk to us about what the definition of a new use reuse is. Alyson, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So for the AFM's purposes, pretty much across the board, a new use is when something was originally recorded for one purpose and is now being used in an entirely different medium, in the sense that the use that it is now being used in is not covered under the first collective bargaining agreement under which the original recording was done. So an example of a new use is if an artist records an album and one of the tracks on that album that's been released through a record label is now being used in a commercial announcement to advertise for Coca-Cola. That's what we consider a new use, because it is something that is totally not covered under the sound recording labor agreement, which was the first agreement, and it is now a use that would be covered under our commercial announcements agreement. So that is baseline what a new use is. A reuse is actually typically used when it's written in one of our collective bargaining agreements, when something that has aired is now re-airing or it's being utilized within the same medium. So if a commercial recording that was recorded in a session for Coca-Cola employed the session for a commercial, and now it's being reused in another Coca-Cola commercial or at a later date, then that's what we consider a reuse. So reuse is also used differently in some of our collective bargaining agreements. So I understand the language can be kind of confusing sometimes, but that's typically the difference between those two terms.
Great. And Janee, do you guys have the same definition for new use and reuse as well?
Yeah, so new use and reuse, it's the same, it means the same thing, it's just used interchangeably. Under Sound Recordings Code, it's called conversion, but it means the same thing. So what the new use and reuse is any time that a song that's made under one of our collective bargaining agreements is being used in a new medium, whether that new medium is under another one of our covered collective bargaining agreements, or if that new medium is non-union.
Great, thank you. And our music supervisors, have to do such hard work. Not only do they have to find creatively what music works, but also within the budget of what they're reporting back to their productions. So can we talk a little bit about how budget comes into this, and how what parameters come into what goes into a new use reuse fee? So Casey, do you want to tackle that one? Oh, you're on mute still.
Nate, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure, so I'll tackle that one. So, the most important thing is a couple parameters, because what we're kind of been finding out lately is there is a lot of times where the label or the studio is not informing the supervisor that there is actually, it might be a union track, and there are use fees under union provisions that are attached to that. So what we always encourage everybody to do is reach out to us. Currently, we don't have an online template. I just saw a question asking that. We have a email address, srlicenses@sagaftra.org, which I can put in the Q&A for you guys. And you can actually email that or email Casey and I directly, and we'll be able to fully confirm for you what those fees would be and if it is a covered track. Our turnaround on getting back to you is about 3 to 5 working business days. And we just kind of want to put it out there, as we know the pandemic has fully affected our industry, and that has affected staffing levels. So we really try really hard to stick to that time frame. If something is urgent, definitely get back to us. But the fees will range, as we kind of mentioned before. Under TV, film, and new media, it's pretty consistent. If the reuse is from one of our collective bargaining agreements into another one of our collective bargaining agreements, that new use where that new medium is lying, those rates will prevail. If it's going into a non-union use, then the fees will go back to where the original contract lies. So it'd be the current applicable minimum under that original contract. For sound recordings, it works a little bit similar, but it is going to be based on the licensing fee and where the new medium lies.
Okay, so if a music supervisor was trying to report back to their production about estimates of what it might be, I mean, is there a way for them to self-service through the information on your website to get a rough estimate on their own, or is it best to go through you and Casey to get those numbers?
Right, so it's going to work both ways. You can access our rate sheets. We have rate sheets and cheat sheets available on our website, and we'll post those links in the chat as well. But to fully confirm, because you would also need to be able to determine how many vocalists actually appear on that track, and if there are lead vocals or if they're background vocalists. So in order to fully get a full, lowdown of what your budget is going to be, you would need to reach out to us, and we can confirm how many vocalists appear on the track so you can get a complete budget. But you can start by going to our website, looking at our rate sheets, and kind of figuring out from there, and then we can fully confirm that for you.
Got it. And just to get an idea of what fees might be, I know it's going to be a full gamut and stuff like that, but what are some of the parameters? I'm assuming the number of singers, the number of musicians, because in my mind, if you have more people on that recording, there's more people to pay. So is that the correct logic? And
that is the correct logic. So under SAG-AFTRA, our fees, and it's going to be dependent on the medium, are going to be anywhere from $505 up to $1,150, and that's all going to be dependent on the medium, how many singers there are, and then you're going to multiply that by the singers. And then on top of that, you also have to pay health and retirement or pension and health, depending on where the new medium of use is.
Got it. And same question to our friends at AFM, either Peter or Alyson, can you chime in on that as well?
So what I think will be helpful for music supervisors is, as far as sound recording into films, I would suggest the first step is who's your licensor? Because if the licensor is signatory to the AFM agreements, then you're going to be able to take advantage of that 7,500 magic number that we see in the chat. that will determine whether your fees will be really high or very reasonable for your budget. So if you're licensing a song from a signatory licensor, and the total licensing fee that you pay is $7,500 or less, then the new use fees that you're going to pay is going to be 7% of the total licensing fee, with a minimum of $165. Okay, plus 14.09% of that 165 or 7% for pension, right? So 165 plus 14.09% potentially. So if you manage to license a recording by a symphony, a philharmonic that has 110 musicians for less than 7,500, you still only pay 7%. But if you license that same recording for over 7,500 from a signatory licensor, or even from a non-signatory licensor, then you have to pay $280+ per musician. So instead of a 7%, now you're looking at 280 times 110 musicians. So that's huge. But again, it's the licensor signatory. If the licensor is not signatory to our current sound recording labor agreement, even if you pay $50, even if they give you a free license, you still have to pay $280 times 110 musicians. So it's better if you license from licensors that are signatory to our agreement.
Got it. And going back to the budget part from a Music Super standpoint, because they always have to report back to production about where they are with money. How can supervisors contact the AFM? Do you guys very similarly to SAG-AFTRA have ability to reach people to get these estimates and quotes?
Yes, release our sound recordings into films, they go on TV. You can contact me. Again, I've worked with a lot of music supervisors over the years. And as Janee said, a lot of times they're not told that there may be AFM fees when they're licensing the work. So I suggest just reach out to us, ask us, these are the songs that we're thinking of using in our project. Are there new use fees? And I provided the different things that we will need to know, right? Who's your licensor? What's the licensing fee? Where was the film produced? But it's always best to come to us. I know there's resources online like Discogs or All Music that will give you a list of musicians that perform on a track. But a lot of times in the studio work, there's more musicians than the ones that you see on the record sleeves. So you always want to contact us, because our session information will include things like if a musician was a leader, which doubles the scale, if they were a contractor, arranger, if they performed doubling, if they did overdubs during the session. So you may have 5 musicians on a website like Discogs, but then when you look at the session report, you figure out that one guy had 5 doubles. So instead of having 5 musicians, you're actually looking at more like 9 or 10 units that you need to take into account. So please always do check with us so we can give you the best estimate. And then ultimately, we give you a more detailed itemized invoice once the new use happens.
Got it. And so when the new use happens, you issue an invoice, they pay it. And is there any other paperwork that needs to happen, or is that seal the deal and it's done from that point on? Peter?
Yeah, for us, once you pay the invoice, you're done. News is a one-time fee. There's not going to be an additional fee for it going into, like if you start it theatrical and then you release it on TV or on the internet, there's not going to be another news fee. It's a one-time thing. Got
it. And Casey, you're nodding your head. Is that the same thing with SAG-AFTRA?
Yes. Same thing with SAG-AFTRA when reuse or new use happens for film, TV. It's just a one-time conversion fee for sound recording. And I usually do the invoicing, and they I just want to tell the music supervisors to the payment should come to the union, to the SAG union, with my attention, and I will distribute them accordingly, along with the health plan contribution.
Got it.
And it works a little bit differently for TV, film, new media reuses. So if the new use is in one of our collective bargaining agreements, then the performers are paid through payroll under that specific agreement. And if they make the final edit, would be entitled to residual payments under our contracts. If the new use is non-union, then you deal directly with the performer and they invoice and you send the health plan information over to me along with the check, and we forward that to the health plan.
Got it. Thank you. And let's talk about these funds that you are collecting for your members, because sometimes I think people see it as an unwanted expense, but this money goes to pay for singers and musicians who deserve these royalties. So can you talk a little bit about where this money goes and that it goes into the pockets of your members? Alyson, can you tackle that one?
Sure. So a lot of the way that new use works for the AFM is that, well, first of all, the obligation for sound recordings comes from our sound recording labor agreement. And it states, for use in any other medium, meaning things that are not covered under the sound recording labor agreement, that the musicians will be paid as if they were employed under the agreement that would have covered that type of use. So basically, just to unpack that a little bit, what it means is that the musicians on the sound recording, that their music is being utilized in a commercial, that they're going to get paid as if they were hired for a commercial. Mm-hmm. So basically, it's just kind of saying, hey, we are using music in a commercial. We are going to pay the musicians that are being utilized as if they were hired to be on a commercial. And, you know, as David, you were alluding to, like, it's really just putting money in the pockets of the musicians because, you know, now that licensing has become such a large part of our lives, musicians are not employed as much for original work. And we, you know, these musicians still need to survive. So it's important that they get compensated as if they were being, you know, employed for a commercial, like a jingle session, which barely exists anymore because licensing has become so prominent. So again, and so that's in regard to the wages, and also similar to SAG-AFTRA, as Janee was talking about earlier, we have a pension fund as well as health and welfare, which is included in most of our collective bargaining agreements. And it's such a huge help to the musicians to have money coming into these funds, especially, you know, today in our world. Like, our pension fund is currently really struggling, and it's always really important to have provisions in our collective bargaining agreements that funnel money into those funds. So that's kind of just an overview of where the money is going.
Great. And SAG-AFTRA, either Casey or Janee, can you talk to us about where these fees go to and how they support your singers?
Absolutely. So the money goes directly to the performers and or their beneficiaries. So SAG-AFTRA doesn't collect any fees when these payments come in, other than on the back end when the performer pays their member dues. It's based off of their earnings that they make within, the quarters in which cover that. But we don't specifically take fees directly from this money and then turn it over to the performer. And as Alyson mentioned as well, is it's so important because these monies help our performers continue to have health insurance and have pension for their retirement as well. So that's where the pension and health, or the health and retirement, which is dependent on where that original use was, is where that's going to be paid, is what's going to help our performers in the long run continue to have health care for themselves, and as well as pension once they retire.
Great. Thank you. And it's such necessary work to do because, you know, our singers and musicians deserve to be paid just like songwriters and artists do. So I congratulate you for the work that you're doing. And of course, we as the music supervisors want to play our part and pay our share too, because we're using their music. So, and that's the reason why we're having this webinar, is to educate everyone to see what our how to be compliant. So we only have like 5 minutes left. Can you guys go ahead and share some of the resources where our music supervisors can find more information on how to be compliant with these new reuse fees and how to pay these fees? Casey or Janee from SAG-AFTRA, would you like to address that?
Yeah, so all information regarding our contracts are on our website, which I did put a link in the Q&A to our contract and resource pages where you can find all that information. And if there's also any questions that you might not be able to find the material, you can reach out to Casey or myself directly, and we can provide you with the contract language or the resource cheat sheets that we have, as well as our rate sheets as well.
Great. I'm seeing in the chat that I didn't see those links. Can you go ahead and pop that in? And would it be too forward to ask for contact information for you guys? Because I know that you're so popular that everyone wants to talk to you guys, because we couldn't get through all those 50 Q&As right now.
Yeah, absolutely. We can put that information in the chat.
Great. Peter and Alyson, can you tell us about some of your online resources and how we can get in contact with you to make sure that we're compliant?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. The best way for all of this to be communicated is for you to email us. We also have a licensing email, but to be completely honest, the emails just get sent to Peter and I. So it's really just for people who don't have our email addresses. So we will absolutely provide that. Similarly, our collective bargaining agreements and our rate sheets are on the AFM website, which is afm.org. And, for people who are not working with the AFM regularly or AFM members, it is difficult to navigate. I will absolutely be the first one to say you won't know where you're going on the website, probably if you're going in blind. So it's better to, come to us and ask us if you can't find something, or if you're looking for general information, we can absolutely point you in the right direction. So we will put a link to the website as well as our emails in the chat.
Perfect. We're just about out of time. I want to say, I want everyone who's viewing right now to give a virtual big hand clap for our panelists who have shared so much of their knowledge with us. Peter, Janee, Alyson, Casey, thank you so much for spending your morning with us and for sharing your knowledge. I know this is all that information that you shared with us will help us do our jobs better as music supervisors while complying and paying your members the hard-earned money that they deserve. So thank you so much.